Okay, so we can start. Hello, everybody. I'm Adam Webb. I'm co-director of the Hopkins Nanjing Center, and I'm happy to welcome the members of the HNC community and our broader universe of friends, whether you're in the morning in China or the evening in the US or in the middle of the night here in Europe. We are recording this panel, so those of you who can't attend live will be able to watch the video online later. So this panel is another of our varied series of events during this 35th anniversary year for HNC. And the center's anniversary is really a celebration of this unique partnership between Johns Hopkins University and Nanjing University. Really an opportunity to further HNC's mission to equip future leaders with an in-depth and nuanced understanding of China and the relationship between the US and China, as well as China's role globally. And it's in that vein that this panel is especially appropriate because in some ways, China and the Global South, the panel is a microcosm of how far HNC has come since it was founded in 1986 and how the context of HNC's mission has evolved in those 35 years. When HNC first opened, it was focused more narrowly on the US-China relationship. And at the time, opportunities were emerging for a relatively small number of Americans to engage with China and for a relatively small number of Chinese to engage with America and the outside world. Since then, over the last 35 years, China's opening and its global engagements have transformed China itself internally, as well as extending China's contact with other parts of the world. And those engagements include a huge and important footprint for China in the Global South, including Africa and Latin America. Many Chinese now go abroad. They know so much more about those regions now than they did 35 years ago. And in the same way, we have foreigners from ever more diverse backgrounds who know more about China today. And I think crucially, they engage with China not only in places like Nanjing, but also outside China on this much more complicated global landscape. The guests that we have tonight, I think, exemplify the expanded horizons and the energy of a new generation of HNC alumni. They all graduated from HNC in roughly the last decade, and I'm fortunate that I've been at HNC long enough myself that I've overlapped with all of them in Nanjing. So by way of introduction, first we have Margaret Myers, the certificate class of 2010-2011. She's the director of the Asia and Latin America program at the Inter-American Dialogue. She's published extensively on China's relations with the Latin America and Caribbean region and teaches courses on China-Latin America relations at Georgetown, George Washington University, and at SAIS. She's testified before the US Congress and previously worked with the US Department of Defense. And in 2018, she was identified by Global Americans as one of the new generation of public intellectuals. We also have Chang Chang. He is from the same certificate 2010-2011 cohort. He's currently program director of the Alliance for a Green Revolution for Africa, based in Nairobi, Kenya, as well as adjunct professor of the Africa Agriculture Research Institute Center at Nanjing Agricultural University. Previously, he served as chief economist at the Made in Africa initiative and as senior advisor to UNDP Asia and Pacific. Chang Chang has published extensively on China's relationship with Africa, especially as it relates to development, economics, and finance, and he's a frequent commentator for television networks. And our third participant, Tang Kai, did her MA degree at HNC between 2016 and 2019, spending a gap year in the middle as a visiting Nanjing scholar at SAIS in Washington. Currently, she's a PhD candidate at SAIS, as well as a research affiliate at Boston University's Global Development Policy Center, and an Oscar Morgenstern Fellow at the George Mason University Mercatus Center. Tang Kai studies political economy of development with a focus on China's engagement with sub-Saharan Africa. She has fieldwork experience in several countries in Africa and Asia and has published in multiple academic journals. Our fourth participant, Guillermo Montenegro, unfortunately, he is unable to attend tonight. He told me about an hour ago that he's dealing with an unexpected medical emergency. So we wish him well and hope he can join us for a future event. So for this panel tonight, most of the time we want to have a free-flowing discussion, including with our audience. But to get us started, I'd like to ask each of our three panelists to say a bit about how you came to your current situation. In other words, how did you transition from being at HNC into your current interests in China and the Global South? And what do you actually do every day? Concretely, what does your work involve nowadays? So shall we start with Margaret? How did you get where you are and what do you do now?
Stroke of luck, I think. No, in all honesty. So I went to, well, first of all, let me say hello to everyone. I see so many names that I know on the screen and a number of familiar faces. So it's wonderful to see everyone, and thank you for joining us. While studying at Hopkins Nanjing, I had already, prior to that, done a lot of work on Latin America and the Caribbean, in addition to working within the U.S. government on China relations. And so I came to the center already with a sort of focus on a couple of different regions. And with something of a comparative perspective. And so while I was at HNC, I saw a job posting actually at the Inter-American Dialogue, which is a Western Hemisphere affairs think tank based in Washington, D.C., for a director of a China-Latin America program, which, this was an area of study that was, China's presence in the Latin American and Caribbean region was already fairly well established at the time, right? There was a lot of trade. Trade in particular underpinned the relationship. There was a considerable degree of investment, and that was really ramping up at the time. But there wasn't extensive literature, right, or scholarship on China-Latin America relations or the China-Latin America dynamic at that particular moment. And so this would be an opportunity, as I read it, right, to sort of establish something new and to expand upon the existing literature and to begin to understand in much greater depth the China Latin America relationship. And so I applied while at the center and flew home during my January break to interview. And by some stroke of luck, I got the job. I was very excited about that. And it was actually very fortunate timing because I was able to use my second semester of my my certificate program, not only studying and doing my coursework, but also trying to understand sort of the landscape, the extent, the network of individuals in China who are studying Latin America in some depth and the China-Latin America dynamic, who's who in China-Latin America relations in China, in other words. So I was able to travel to Beijing, Shanghai, and other places to get to know a number of folks and to begin to develop a network of my own, and then brought that to bear in my work later on at the Inter-American Dialogue. So that's sort of how it all happened. And I've been there ever since. It's been, about a decade at the Dialogue, which seems like a long time, but this is a relationship that is ever evolving. And so it's never been a dull moment. And I'd say, in terms of my overall work at the Dialogue, it's a mix of fundraising, unsurprisingly, right, which is a big component of work in think tanks, and also, research and writing, mostly project management, right, associated with that fundraising. And the fundraising sort of research and writing ratio is about 60-40, I would say, which came as something of a surprise to me, working in this area. I had imagined it being sort of flipped. So it's a lot of work, sort of, a very entrepreneurial job, in a way, determining the course of the programmatic interests and areas of focus, and then finding ways to indeed make those, fundable. So I'll stop there, Adam.
Okay, Chang, how did you get where you are and what do you do now?
All thanks to HNC and science, I have to say that. I guess I was the first or only PhD student spent the first year at the center back to the year 2010 when Margaret was actually my classmate. So at that time, I have already chosen Africa and development as my research topic. But back in 2010, I had no idea what it was like. And nobody in China have to say understand what that means, just 10 years ago. So thanks to the just the brilliant education and all this research literature and the library over there at HNC, I had a basic idea of what is Africa study and development studies like. And then after another year, and I got invited to SAIS as a visiting scholar. And I went there to study. And at that time, Professor Deborah Buckingham of the also Tang Keyi's boss was very initially started the China Africa Research Initiative. So I was the first Chinese to join the initiative. So that's basically I literally stepped into the world of Africa study in an academic sense. So over there, I did 1 year as a non-resident associated fellow at the Carey. And then I got very luckily to sponsored by SAIS to do my field studies in Africa. And after that, I graduated, I got my PhD. I joined the Renmin University of China, pretty good one, and published my PhD dissertation back in 2018. And then I just found I was too young to spend the rest of my life locking up in the ivory tower. So I want to get in the field. So I left the institution, you know what I mean, 离开了体制. And I joined the UNDP. And then 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, I chose to join Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. It's an African-based international non-government organization. Very powerful in Africa. We are the biggest, one of the biggest public investor for the agriculture sector in Africa. Over the year, I oversee the whole organization's engagement with China, mostly with the government. That's basically how I get from HNC to my current work. My daily work, first of all, I'm based in Nairobi, theoretically, but because of COVID, I actually based in Beijing. So I'm locked up, working from home alone for like 18, 19 months already. My daily job is like 50-50. 50% of my daily work is to facilitate across work, cooperation, multiple programs, projects with the Chinese government, foreign affairs, agricultural and rural affairs, commerce, like that. And another 50, I will use the time to do my research on agriculture in Africa, especially donors' engagement with the sector. Yeah, and I still trying to find time to do some real study and maybe publish. Yeah, that's basically my daily work. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tang Keyi.
Hi, everyone. I think Chen Chen and Margaret are much more pioneer in this field. So I definitely, I admire a lot of their work, and I'm still, like exploring. I want to start with that. So how did I get here? Essentially, as Adam mentioned before, the Nanjing Scholar is actually what brings me to this opportunity. So the Nanjing Scholar program basically offered me a chance to study in DC for a year for tuition fee waiver. And, as a my student, I have to write a dissertation. So I just take different classes and think about what should I write about. And then, of course, as mentioned by Chen Chen, SAIS China Africa Research Initiative is one of the most frontier place in the States to study China Africa. And I took this class by Professor Brodingham on China in Africa, where I not only gained about the debates and also wrote my dissertation, which was, became my first journal article publication. And at the same time, I got this opportunity from Professor Brodingham and Carey in doing an original fieldwork in Ethiopia and Vietnam to study Chinese special economic zone there. So I just went there during the summer to 2 countries, doing, alone, just doing research. So due to past dependency, I think I've spent so much time and energy on this topic. Why don't I just continue doing a PhD on it? So I think the most fascinating questions I'm, fascinated by China and Global South is to examine how this capital and global market that drives China in the last 3 decades for its miraculous growth is now expanding to the rest of the developing world. So the 2 questions that essentially driving my research is, what is the difference between Chinese capital and Western capital? And what are some of the impacts the Chinese capital have on the global South? So on a daily basis, I'm doing research on my dissertation, which is essentially looking at how do politicians in Africa distribute Chinese finance at the subnational level, and comparing that with World Bank finance. So I employ both GIS data, and also I'm planning to do travel to Zambia and Ghana in April, and conduct down to case studies and field interview with people. Yeah, that's pretty much what I do every day.
I think one thing which I often think of when looking at sort of China and the global South is that if you think back to the history of HNC and SAIS, each of those was founded because of a sense that at the time expertise was lacking on certain important emerging areas of international politics. So as some of you know, SAIS was founded in the 1940s when the US was taking on a global role, but was really short of the area of expertise and the global perspective for doing that. And then in the case of HNC in the 1980s, there was this sense that the US-China relationship was becoming much more important, but that the 2 societies had been disconnected for so long that they didn't really understand one another. And when one thinks about China and the global South, it seems that China's global footprint, its political role, its economic engagements with Africa and Latin America, that footprint has expanded much faster than the expertise or the understanding or the contact between people in those regions and countries. I was wondering if you've encountered that in your own work. I mean, in a sense, you're all pioneers. I mean, there are not many people who are experts on these areas, these regions, and these interactions. I mean, do you feel that there is a gap in expertise, or what does this look like in your own work, encountering people as they think about these issues but may not have actually had formal training in it, or it may be fairly new to them? In either direction, of China, Chinese perspectives on the global South, or global South perspectives on China. I don't know, Margaret, do you want to?
Sure, I'm happy to chime in on that. And of course, I'm looking at this from an outsider's perspective, but I remember reading when I started out working on China Latin America relations at the Dialogue, a couple of articles by then Chinese Academy of Social Sciences scholar named Institute of Latin American Studies scholar named Sun Hongbo, and he cautioned many times over against what he called sort of swarming, right, of opportunities in Latin America. And what he meant by that was just extensive activity without, accompanying extensive research or understanding of what Latin America was, and the differences between different countries and different investment environments, the likely risks associated with investing in certain places. And indeed, in those early years, Chinese companies encountered a lot of challenges, and this was a common theme in discussions about the China Latin America dynamic, that this was, first of all, the farthest place, right, from China. It was the region probably least well understood as a result of that. It was the newest overall relationship. Sort of enhanced relations with Latin America began about a decade after they did with Africa. And so, yeah, I mean, it's well acknowledged, I think, in the literature and, and more informally among Chinese scholars that at the beginning, at least, there wasn't sufficient understanding. And when you looked at sort of the list of folks who were looking at Latin America in any depth within the academic realm, it amounted to about 50, right, when I was there studying at the center. Now there are a lot more. And that's due in large part to, an extensive effort on the part of the Chinese government, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Finance, to put a lot of funding toward area studies, not just Latin American studies or Caribbean studies or Mexican studies or Brazilian studies, but area studies globally. So there's a major focus on this across the board. And we do see considerably more expertise in these areas. And as a result, we are seeing more of a cautious approach and I think informed approach to investment in certain sectors. And indeed, companies that have now been on the ground for 2 decades and have extensive networks. They work with, local public relations firms, local risk management firms, local insurance companies. They have local staff on the payroll, and they understand things a lot better. That's not to say that Chinese companies don't run into difficulties, just as wide-ranging other international companies do. It's a difficult operating environment in Latin America frequently, but things are changing, and I assume that this, trajectory will continue into the next few decades.
What about from the other direction? I mean, how do you see Latin American knowledge of China?
So a lot depends on the country that we're talking about, but in general, and this is, something that I won't make the judgment, but plenty of Latin Americans, note that the expertise is not yet sufficient on China. That said, there are a lot of, at least now, and you can see this, plainly in the ranks of government officials in Latin America, a lot of folks who have studied in China and now hold positions in ministries of foreign affairs across the region, or are in media outlets, or are in business, I think more extensively, and in many cases speak Chinese, have lived in China, and do, at least to some degree, understand China better than anyone could have said, a decade ago. But, within the policy realm and in terms of developing policy toward China, especially, a sort of strategic policy toward China, we're not really seeing much evidence of that yet. And I think that's in large part because in general, the people in positions of power and in positions within foreign ministries have more limited experience, I think, than Latin American countries in the region would hope.
Yeah, so there is a kind of a generational issue and a linguistic issue as well. I mean, the number of Chinese who speak Spanish or Latin Americans who speak Chinese is certainly limited, though I think gradually changing. Chen-Chen, what do you know to China and Africa? I mean, do you get a sense that expertise is beginning to catch up with the realities on the ground?
Yeah, it is catching up, but still the gap is there, a very big gap. If you think about China's economic engagement with Africa, it's like this much. Our expertise knowledge for China, for Africa is like this. Like today's China, still, I don't think there is one institute like SAIS has this multidisciplinary and multi-regional studies. And following Margaret's topic, regional study has been put upon a lot of attention from the central government. And just want to let you know that regional studies in China is already ranked the first tier of principal studies in China. So it's like regional study with literature study, with like physics or chemistry. So regional study has been like really being lived up to a very, very high level in national strategy for education, for higher education. So you can understand, to be honest with you, like academically, regional studies should not be like that, but that shows the government attention. I've been called to consultation with Nanjing and Peking U and Tsinghua, a lot of universities regards their regional studies education. And I want to share with them what has SAIS done, or HNC has done. with regional studies. I told them you need not only like Latin America studies, like Africa studies, Southeast Asia studies, you also need like econ studies, financial studies, diplomacy studies, political science studies. Like you need like this, you know, so you can better locate your research and put it in the right context of the research. I don't know how they listen to me or not, but it is a going process right now as we are speaking. So what's on the Africa side? I guess most of African governments, I've been working with the President Palace. I've been working with foreign minister, financial ministers from Africa, like really a lot. And I have to say, most of them don't really have a clear idea of the institutions, the setups in Chinese government, the different apparatus, especially after President Xi Jinping took over office. There has been a lot of transformation regards China's government, Chinese government, central government, regards their management system, religious, their different line of work. But for instance, CITCA, China International Cooperation, International Development Cooperation Agencies, right? It was set up 2018. Theoretically, it oversees all the Chinese foreign aid, but to be honest, nobody really understands their work because they haven't put in like a sufficient capacity into the study of it. So I agree with you. The gap is there, it's catching up. Thank you.
Tan Kai, you actually probably have a slightly different perspective, and you came into this a few years later than Margaret and Chen Chen. How are you seeing sort of expertise and even just familiarity among people, right? The amount of contact that people have had across these different regions.
Great. I guess I'll mainly discuss from academia, but actually, I think there are tons of practitioners on the ground who knows much more. So when I was in Addis Ababa in 2018, there were 100,000 Chinese, according to the people I interviewed, in just in the city. And you have reached tons of headlines of, you know, Harvard French, things like 1 million Chinese in Africa. So like Angola rates, definitely the most. So I think there's a lot of people on the ground doing things, but they don't necessarily talk about it. You know, they do construction works, they do petty business, they invest, they try to make money, right? Why you know, talk about it? I don't think there's a tradition in Chinese, you know, like to talk too much about what you do, just do it. But I think this tension has, this field has attracted a lot of academic, you know, like interest in both because of the more access to data, partially due to what Carrie has been doing in the last 5 years and now it's transferring to BU. But we've been collecting data showing much more, you know, like what China is lending to Africa by project. And we also have great work at A-Data, having more geocoded information. So with access to bigger data and more information, so we have been seeing much more quantitative work from both economists and political science on this field. But also it's just like in terms of the scale, I think academia is usually lagging behind what the policy is working on, right? You know, like the 2 biggest Chinese policy banks, already the total amount of development finance committed by these 2 policies has overtaken basically everything else, like World Bank, IMF, OECD countries aid to the rest of the world. But you know, nobody has done that much research until recently. So I definitely see there's a much greater demand and also enthusiasm of students. I've seen like in younger generation, even during the undergraduates, many more students are taking these kind of classes. They want to understand it from many different angles, like public health, military, manufacturing, you know, education. There's a lot of topics to explore this field. And but as Chen Chen mentioned, there's a lack of expertise. as Chen was saying, like I don't think Chinese university, like for our undergraduate studies, there's much choice in terms of regional study. Also, if you think about Chinese university at the nationwide that offer classes regarding Africa, it's probably like less than 5. And regarding US institutions, I feel like there's a lot of, China studies. And also with the recent, tension US China, there's always like a more hawkish approach and with the media, painting. So people has been already, like usually when they enter into this field, they have some preconception of what they see in the media, which already, all media are, have their different angles, right? So I think there's a more demand for evidence-based research with more access to data. I think there's a lot to be done.
Thanks. This is certainly an area that we are hoping to build up at HNC. I mean, we've had a number of our students in recent years who've been interested in these topics. We've had visiting speakers. We had a mini course on China and Africa relations. We had one of our Chinese faculty teaching about environmental issues in Africa. And I think this is something that HNC is really uniquely situated to be able to build up in the next few years. We are a bilingual institution, and I think unlike a lot of other universities, think tanks, etc., dealing with these kinds of topics, on the one hand, we are deeply embedded in China, so we can look at the Chinese end of this in Chinese, but we also have a global reach. We have the sort of model of area studies and this kind of global multidisciplinary approach that comes from SAIS and Johns Hopkins. So in a way, I think we are uniquely situated to work on this. One of the initiatives that we're trying to build up is experiential learning, looking at trips outside China for students to engage with China's global points of contact with other regions, and I think that's quite an exciting priority for some of our current students. So this very much does connect with HNC's mission, probably in a different way than we might have understood that mission 35 years ago. I want to open up to our audience for questions. I'd invite you to type questions in the Q&A or the chat, I guess, and we can start collecting some of those. I see Lishua has had a couple of comments typed in the chat that journalism, right? And that he met a Brazilian journalist in Beijing and who said he was the only journalist from Latin America. Also raises an interesting question about career prospects, that the perception is on the Chinese side, the career prospects for regional experts are much more limited. Are you encountering that as well? I mean, what advice would you give, say, to an HNC student today who wants to, pursue this as a career interest? And what would you suggest by way of advice, or what their prospects might be in different contexts? How much of a future is there in this? Are you the exception, or are you the vanguard of future successful HNC alumni? Who wants to take that?
I'll say something about that. And apologies if I'm jumping in, but I think as Tang Kui mentioned, it's within think tanks, right, or perhaps within UN institutions, or with at BU, or studying with Deborah Brodegum, there are only a handful, right, that end up holding these positions and having these research opportunities. That said, as you mentioned, I do think that Hopkins Nanjing Center students are very well positioned for this sort of opportunity, given the language, the strength of their Chinese language or English language, but their bilingual skills, sometimes trilingual skills or more, right? And deep understanding of China and of the US and the China-US dynamic. And so, have been exceedingly competitive, across the, I've seen this, at the Inter-American Dialogue, we work with a lot of former HNC grads. And I know, Dr. Brodegum has too, as has Kevin Gallagher and many others who are all pioneers in this field. So that's well proven. That said, there are plenty of opportunities outside of academia and outside of sort of the research, realm within think tanks, for example. plenty of government positions, at least in the US, that are focused on these relationships. And then, obviously within the private sector. And there are countless, I would say, consulting shops, risk analysis, insurance companies, all of these wide, companies in wide-ranging industries where China happens to be engaged, whether we're talking about extractives or agriculture or infrastructure development or now high-tech everything, right? Or electricity transmission, smart grids, AI, really, you name it. There are a lot of opportunities. Is language all that you can bring to bear? No, not necessarily, right? And this might be what is being referenced in this question, that there aren't always just opportunities in area studies. It helps to partner that with some perhaps technical expertise in some other area, maybe some skills in economics or in some other form of analysis. Data science, but indeed there are opportunities. It's just a matter of sort of understanding the expanse of opportunities out there, and that it goes way beyond just research within think tanks.
Yeah. What about for Chinese students? Tang-Kai or Chang-Chang, do you have any thoughts or advice on what the career path looks like in a Chinese context for this?
Well, regards to the insurance question, I think it's much more improved right now, because Chinese companies, they have their sub-companies basically spreading all over the world. So actually, students interested in regional studies in Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, they actually have a pretty good prospect regards their job. For instance, if you study Swahili, like East African language. I know, Adam, you speak Swahili a little bit, right?
I studied a little bit, long time ago.
Yeah, so I got a Swahili name, Mukali, means Mr. Mean. So
I've seen that on your WeChat profile, I think, yes.
Yeah, so if you study Arabics, you spoke Swahili, you speak Hausa, just a little bit. It will greatly help you if you found a job in like a really good payment for these Chinese companies. If you want to work for the public sector, no matter for like think tanks, universities, or the government, I think it is also improved. Long before, one of the critiques for China, like the academic work, is like we don't have the swing door, like the United States has. Like scholars will become like government advisors. Well, we still don't have it officially, but unofficially, the Chinese government actually will consult a lot of experts regards their expertise. So I myself, I offer my consultation for MOFA and the finance and even the central bank really constantly. So I think it's really depends on yourself, like how good are you? If you're really good at what you study, then I believe you have a very good prospect, no matter in the private sector or public sector. But you just want to do the degree, then you probably will not have this kind of jobs. So that's my perspective.
Tang-Kai, did you have any thoughts on this?
I guess I would echo more on Chen-Chen's point on the private sectors. So my undergraduate was like from the language school, right? A lot of my friends, like especially if you study, let's see, French, you can make at least two or three times of what you make in China if you choose to go working in Africa. So for example, like a recent ad I saw from WeChat Moment, it was like being a chef working in a Chinese company in one particular African country will bring you like 200,000 kwai per month. So I guess that should be at least 4 times of what a regular Chinese chef make in China. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities in terms of private sectors, but I definitely see what some of the people are asking in the group in terms of how much you understand local culture, right? Not only the language. A lot of what I see on the ground is that some Chinese companies, they will try local who speak Chinese. We've seen like a lot of Confucius Institute in facilitating Chinese language study has attracted a lot of for example, Ethiopians, they choose to study Chinese because they want to work in a Chinese company, and that will give them much better pay. So I think for facilitating more Chinese students understanding not only the language, but more about political institutions, the culture of the region they're interested in is very important. Because it's not only language, it's a lot about culture.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think one of the sort of concerns a lot of observers have had is that a lot of the relationship has been sort of either state to state or in terms of, sort of high-level economic ties. And often, I think there's a perception that society to society ties or societal understanding or contact between people has been more limited, and this sometimes has led to some blind spots in terms of cultural understanding, or even looking at the diplomatic relationships, right? I mean, often the sense that governments may change, right, because of pressures in society, and then this comes as a surprise if one is not familiar with what's happening on the ground. So it seems that kind of deep, right, the kind of expertise that HNC and institutions like it create can be pretty important for the success of the relationship. I see there's a question in the chat about how differentiated this understanding is, right? I mean, are these regions being seen sort of as a whole in a fairly uniform way, or is the expertise becoming more nuanced about particular countries, particular issues, particular sectors? Do you sense a trend in that for either Africa or Latin America?
I can chime in on that point. I mean, this was a major problem, right? And I think reflective of a sort of limited understanding at the onset of this heightened relationship, right? Enhanced relationship about a decade ago or even 2 decades ago. I remember attending a forum probably about 11 years ago on China, Latin America, that was hosted by the Inter-American Development Bank and CCPIT, trade promotion, China's trade promotion agency. And there's a sort of Latin America pavilion or a sort of, go-to place for information on Latin America as a region. It had all palm trees and, and beaches. And there were some Chileans standing there, and they said, what in the world is this? This has nothing to do with Chile, obviously, right? Which, as we all know, doesn't have too many palm trees. So, so there was indeed, sort of, I wouldn't say an effort to, but, by a tendency to paint Latin America and the Caribbean with a broad brush. That's changed. And what we are seeing now, interestingly, is and I think still, the sort of societal relations, as you mentioned, Adam, are that's a challenge, and it takes a long time to develop and understand. A lot of presence on the ground, a lot of deep thinking about and engagement with countries and cultures. But what we are seeing are very differentiated approaches to engagement with different countries in Latin America. And this is based in very large part on what tends to be a wild fluctuation in political environments in Latin America, from, elections of, very right-wing candidates, and then, elections of very left-wing candidates, and swinging back in a very dramatic fashion. And this can be challenging for China and Chinese companies, and has resulted in problems for projects that China has invested in places like Argentina, for example. And so what China has done, especially in countries that have, particularly decentralized or federalist systems of governance, is to localize extensively their operations, to engage far more extensively with, provinces or states, or with municipalities of various sizes, not just, capital cities, but some, rather large towns, and to strike deals at the lower local level, subnational level. And this is a trend that we're seeing across the entire region. But with more of a focus on in certain countries than others, depending upon what the overall political environment looks like, and what prospects there are for engagement with heads of state or with national government officials. And so there really is a differentiated strategy. Again, also depending upon the sort of resources that countries have, we see, a very different approach to resource acquisition, depending upon systems of governance and the resources sort of at play.
I see there's a related question for Changcheng and Tang Kai in the comments about, I guess, the African student population in Nanjing, but I guess this could touch on a broader theme of migration, right? I mean, the couple of million people, I guess, by some Chinese in Africa, by some estimates, there's a large, African immigrant population clustered in some cities, including Nanjing has had a somewhat, checkered sort of local situation with, interactions between the African population and locals. To what extent is migration and people-to-people contact either, improving this understanding or potentially creating points of friction? And we often see news about this, but do you get a sense that contact between people is expanding, or is it creating misunderstanding sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, talking about Nanjing, back in, I think 1991 or maybe 1989.
1889, there were like, race riots and so on.
Right, yeah. So like African students, like they were, they had a big conflict with the local communities and got a lot of attention. So that's really the case. I think it's much improved before the COVID. China is open to the world. So many tourists and immigrants coming to China to study, to work. So it's much improved. But then the COVID, you all heard about all this news about foreigners being mistreated in China, not by the government, in a lot of cases by the local communities. I won't say it's understandable, but I don't like I'm not defending them, but because still China is a large country, so consider the population, a lot of them, I want to say 90% of Chinese population still haven't talked to foreigners, like substantially interact with them before. So if you don't understand what is that like, so in a lot of cases, they may do things not according to international law. But also good signs, like before COVID, I'm Nanjingese. I come from Nanjing, right? So I helped the Nanjing municipal city government to like hosted like it's called Jiangsu Southern Africa Development Community Dialogue twice. So each time we will invite like ambassadors from those SADC countries to Beijing and invite them all over to Nanjing City and sit down with municipal and provincial leaders and share their like opinions and sign some contract regards trade, investment, tourism. So I think there's a good things, there's a bad things. What is more concerning to me is the impact of COVID. How long will it last? China still keep our border shut down. So when will it open? I hope the Beijing Olympics and maybe the later big events in China's political arena will eventually lead up to the open up of Chinese border. If it's open up, I think things will be much improved gradually. If it will still remain locked up, I don't know.
Tang Kai, you're going to Africa soon, I think, right? To do field work?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess Chen talked a lot about Africans in China. I can talk about Chinese in Africa. I mean, there's definitely a lot of tension of illegal migration, right? And in Africa, Chinese, like including what you see earlier period in Ghana, like a lot of mines, because if you have to get your workers like official work limit permits, you may need to pay like thousands of dollars. And some of the companies will just get the workers like a tourist visa, which is illegal, right? And you've also been seeing cases of Chinese sex workers working in Kenya, in DRC, There's definitely, a lot of tension of whether it's illegal or legal, according to local standard. And you also see this, racial tension in places like South Africa, well, like when you have bigger Chinese community. I think Professor Yunju Park, she has a lot of work on that. So as Chen Chen saying, I totally agree that COVID becomes a big issue. So from what I heard rumor, like, because China's zero tolerance COVID policy, a lot of Chinese workers who are now working in China, in Africa, they can't get back. Like I heard, like basically everyone working in the private sector in Ethiopia, they haven't, got like a health code, like a green health code to be able to get back to China because of the rising cases in Ethiopia. So yeah, it's been really hard and disheartening because these people, they want to go back to China, but they can't in the short run.
There's a question a little further down here about moving more in a political direction about extremist and insurgent activity in the Sahel region. I think this could extend more broadly to the economic interests and what political security interests follow from that. I mean, certainly if one looks at the precedent of other great powers as their economic interests in a region expand, often the political entanglements, the security entanglements tend to follow from that. I mean, what do you see happening with China's need, if any, to back its economic involvement with security involvement in these regions?
For Sahel, the things is deteriorating very quickly. I myself have my concern over the region. Most importantly is French. Is French troops can stay or not? If it's downgrading, how much is like a descaling up to? If French truly leave the region, then the region will, I'm afraid, go into a pretty bad situation. And only upon that time, then China should consider or think about planning for our different ways of intervening. I still don't think military intervening is an option for China. Perhaps we'll still be working with EU and other international actors. One thing I keep on telling my friends all over the world is like, for China, we don't have to really work with Americans in Africa because, to be honest, Americans don't have a really significant interest in Africa. But China should try everything to cooperate with EU because EU has a lot of interest, like core interest over there in Africa. Well, one of the most important is how to stop the next migration wave from a country like, region like Sahel or Horn of Africa, all the way from Mediterranean to Europe. So I think China and Europe should have and would have come up with a plan to work together. Economically, diplomacy speaking, to help to stabilize the Sahel region situation. And I also want to mention that the ECOWAS, the East African International Organization, they still possess a lot of power at their hand. So if they're truly determined and better supported by international community, I believe ECOWAS will do a pretty good job to containing the situation.
I think there's a related question there. I mean, we've been talking about the relationship between China and these regions. We haven't talked so much about the Western role there, except as Chen Chen was just saying with France and the US and so on. A lot of this relationship also depends on how the public in these countries, in China and the West and in Africa and Latin America, how they imagine their roles in the world, right? So, I mean, as China's role has expanded, I mean, do you think that the Chinese public can imagine China taking a leading role in these regions in the same way? And conversely, I mean, can you imagine the West becoming more comfortable with these areas, not necessarily being sort of a Western sphere of influence? And what is the sort of public imagination or the mental map of influence in the world that is involved here? In Latin America, for example, people have always said this is the backyard of the US for so long, right? And in some ways, this seems to be shifting. How do you think people imagine this at both ends?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of this from a couple of different perspectives. I would say that, I mean, China has made mention, right, on a number of occasions that it has no interest in playing a sort of leading role, right, or you know, in any way, sort of aside from working, you know, extensively at a multilateral, bilateral, and again sub-regional level to advance certain development objectives. I mean, this is a common phrasing that we hear in Chinese speeches. You know, does not look to advance any sort of governance-related objectives, and is not interested in playing any sort of leading role within the region. That said, you know, certainly what we see in practice is considerable dependence on China. And, you know, to the extent in Latin America, and my understanding, based on figures I've heard, is that Latin American economic dependence on China is far more extensive than any other region, especially certain countries. Which I don't know if that factors in Southeast Asia. It doesn't make much sense to me. But I heard from JP Morgan not all that long ago that you know, a 1% drop in China's growth equates to a 1% drop in Latin American growth, and even more so in the case of certain countries that are integrally linked from a trade perspective with China, for example, Brazil. And so that means that China has extensive economic and, by extension, political influence on a number of countries, not necessarily direct political influence, but indirect political influence, certainly, right, on a number of countries and on their decision making. And so whether China, you know, wants to play a leading role or be a, you know, a sort of a dominant player in the region or not, it has become that, at least for certain countries in the region, especially in South America. And so, you know, I don't know how I rely on Cheng Cheng's and Pankli's views on how the Chinese population, you know, thinks about all of this, and they haven't, or if they have an appetite for China playing this role in other regions. But you know, I'd say already we see indications of a really broad acceptance of China's role in the region, and even of China's thinking on certain policy matters, including things such as internet governance, for example.
Yeah, I totally agree with Margaret on the dependence of especially commodity exporting countries on China. Essentially, what we see in the past 2 decades is China boom drives up the commodity boom, with China contributing to over 60 to 70% of the core commodity imports of the entire world. So this commodity boom allows these commodity exporting countries much more income, right? And they use this income to build infrastructure, and you know, Chinese company happen to be good in doing that, and then you know, in trying to improve their people's life. So we definitely see that this is so intermingled in terms of, you know, all kinds of perception. Like Afrobarometer, they rank China. They, you know, after the recent survey shows that 69% of Africans have a positive view on China. But interestingly, when they think about what represents the best way of development, they still rank US as the highest and China as the second. So in terms of soft power, I would say that US is still probably like bigger in terms of Africans' perception. But what about Chinese perception on you know, China's government's role in the world? We definitely see it's debating, you know, for middle class, seeing like a powerful government that is doing more, you know, things influencing more people in terms of soft power, that's good. But on the other hand, when people see economic slowdown and their pocket becomes like smaller, they will say, oh, is it rational to, you know, give up so much loans overseas? So that's, I think, maybe Chen can talk about what Beijing people are thinking.
Beijing people. Just for record, I am always a Nanjing people. I don't like Beijing at all. I'm just stuck here, but COVID regulation. It's big snow out there. I mean, I'm a southerner. I hate cold. I cannot deal with cold. That's why I moved to Nairobi. Come on. Sorry, I was kidding. It is fascinating to hear what Margaret and Ke talk about the perspectives of Latin American people, and other regions, how they view their dependence on China. Do you know how China view this? We're worried that we depend too much on South America. Why? Because China has become the largest importer of food, not globally, but also historically. Perhaps I want to say like for soybeans, for corn, 60%, 80% of China's consumption has to be imported. And within this importation, I want to say 95% comes from America. I mean, I'm not talking about the USA, I'm talking about Canada, USA, Brazil, and Argentina. There's 4 countries. And because of the China-US rivalry, more and more comes from Argentina and Brazil. So for China's policymakers, I don't know, I haven't talked with them, but I believe they're pretty much concerned about China's dependence over Latin America. So it's like one case, if you look from different approach, like you have come up with different feelings. Regards China's public imagination about like Chinese public, our imagination about China, I won't say China is still very much an inward-looking country, and perhaps more and more inward-looking after the COVID-19. Like a lot of young people choose to work for the government. Before they want to work for the multinationals, they want to work for the high-tech companies, Alibaba, Tencent, Xiaomi, TikTok. But after COVID, like it is natural because of this big pandemic. Like young people more and more choose to work for the government. They want to stay even in their hometown. So before COVID, it's a word, and after COVID, it's a different word. And another thing I want to point out is like the difference, like the perspective of very much differentiated among different regions. For Africa, for Latin America, I believe China, actually the public, I mean, talking about Chinese people, they don't really care that much. But for Southeast Asia, I think it's a totally different story. And to be honest, from an econ and a political perspective, Southeast Asia is just too important, way too important for China, comparing to Latin America, comparing to Africa. Politically, geographically speaking, diplomatically speaking, everything. How many people know that Indonesia will become the 4th or 5th biggest economy of the world before 2040? Yeah, just like that. Indonesia, right over there, down to the south. And Singapore and Thai and Southeast Asian country, they're just from a like ordinary Chinese perspective, they value this region, this country way more important than Latin America and Africa. So that's what I mean, like different region, different cases. Thank you.
I guess the world isn't flat, as Thomas Friedman said in the 1990s, right? It's quite a varied landscape, I guess. I guess one final question: if you were to look ahead, say 5 or 10 years into the future, if you had to predict one issue which you think will become much more important in these relationships, one topic that will be in the news that people will have to pay attention to that is not getting enough attention now, what do you think it would be? What should HNC people pay attention to, or SAIS or NJU or the public? What's going to come on the radar screen? Like 5 or 10 years out.
Maybe I can go first.
Who wants to talk? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnerships. I mean, yes, a lot of reporting in the English word, a lot of reporting in Chinese word, a lot of reporting all the way in Southeast Asia. But I don't think most people understand the importance of it. China, 中国, Central Kingdom, like where the center, where the rhetoric's position, center of the world. So for thousands of years, China never viewed itself as an Asian country. We just happen to be in Asia. We never view ourselves as an Asian country. But signing of the RCEP, it shows a really historically transformation regards China's grand strategy. I'm talking about like centennial strategy that China maybe is moving our identity into an Asian country. So if RCEP truly worked, and I hope it truly worked, China will be willing to constrain ourselves. Like we're willing to constrain ourselves. We'll be working with other Asian countries from the north, South Korea, Japan, from the south, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, or even Thai and Laos, all the Southeast Asian countries. So China will try to, harmonious our relationship with these countries and choose regional development method for the region. So there will be much more like a EU type in the future. I'm very much pessimistic. I for myself, I see it's quite promising. But if RCEP doesn't work, I don't know. Maybe the tragedy of great powers will truly emerge. So that's my foresee for the future in the 10
Okay.
years.
Other predictions? What big topics are going to be getting attention in 5 or 10 years in the future, do you think?
I'll give a stab. So, as Shangcheng mentioned, there's been a much more inward-looking agenda, really, since COVID, dual circulation. I mean, wide-ranging reasons why China has chosen to look to focus more extensively on self-sufficiency and to employ wide-ranging policies that are indeed more inward-looking than they have been in the past. There's still a prioritization of the BRI and certainly more engagement in all of these regions. But what we have seen in Latin America is what I like to call a tapering of engagement, right? So trade continues to underpin the relationship. It continues to grow, but at slower rates than in the past. FDI is sort of up and down. It slowed during the pandemic, but it'll probably, go back up a little bit. But there's no clear upward trajectory in terms of FDI, and finance has just dropped off the map, at least policy bank finance, right? The state-to-state sovereign lending. We see commercial bank lending and other things happening, but it's dropped off the map. So the question is, and this is something that, I know a lot of advisory firms in the US and other places are talking about to Latin Americans. What happens if China doesn't come to the rescue, right? In the way that it did sort of after 2008, after the global financial crisis. China's engagement, trade, and investment propped up regional growth post 2008. Will it be able to do that again? Will Chinese investment, even tapered Chinese investment in very strategic sectors, be something that can help the region? And so I would say, I don't know, 5 years, but 10 years out, I mean, China's facing its own problems, right? There are wide-ranging challenges that China needs to face, structural issues, which it may do so very effectively, but it may also struggle to do, which may cause it to, to be even more inward-looking, or to change tack entirely, or to, reform somewhat the BRI. It is, in fact, an ever-evolving and organic initiative, right? So if that happens, Latin American countries need to be prepared for the possibility that this is not an ever-growing relationship, right, as it's often characterized in the media. And so I would say it's a cautionary note more than anything for Latin American planners, because there tends to be this view that China will always be there and will be there at ever-growing rates looking ahead. And then the other thing I would say just very quickly, is the US-China dynamic and how that plays out. And of course, HNC students are looking at this in considerable depth. Biden in Latin America has taken a much quieter approach to this than the Trump administration has, but who knows what will happen in the next presidential election in the US. So we shall see how this plays out and what happens in terms of overall tensions, because certainly those have an impact, not just on Latin American countries, but across the globe.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I would agree with what Margaret has been observed in Latin America. So our team at BU has recorded 0 Chinese loans to Africa in 2021. And there were only like about 3 to 4 or at most 5 Chinese loans in 2020, and it's all in ICT sector. Foresee a key independent variable that we should focus a lot more than now is state-owned enterprises, Chinese contractors. So what they do will affect a lot of what is going to look like in the next 10 years. Why is that? Because what has happened, a lot is like a lot of times policy banks may not want to, give the money, but because these companies, contractors are faced with so much pressure of overcapacity, and they have more huza. They lobbied a lot of policy banks and African governments to take on projects more aggressively than they should be, and now we are seeing a pushback from policy banks saying that we are not going to just keep lending based on your request, because as SOE leaders they all get money, right, if you get a project done. So we've been seeing much more like joint venture, instead of like shifting from loans to investment, that SOEs will take the risk much more than the policy banks. So yeah, that will be a research focus that I think will be very interesting.
Okay, thanks. I think we're almost out of time, but I think this conversation has been fascinating to hear these different perspectives and experiences, and I think it really exemplifies what HNC can do so well, right? That they can look at these kinds of global relationships from different ends, from different perspectives. That people have this wonderful capacity to bridge experience on the ground with very concrete issues, as well as having a kind of global or sort of academic perspective on things as well. So this is really something we are hoping to build up more of at HNC. And being a bilingual institution, obviously we've done this event in English, but you can imagine being able to talk about these issues and research them both in English and in Chinese. It's something that HNC is really uniquely situated to do more with. So I'd certainly like to thank all of our panelists for participating, and also thank our audience for attending. We certainly want to thank you for the commitment that so many of our alumni have had, and for the generous support that you've been giving in various forms during this 35th anniversary year. If you're interested in renewing contact with HNC, if you've been out of touch with us for a while, renewing your partnership with us, there are certainly a lot of ways you can get involved and support some of our ongoing initiatives, and also receive updates regarding future events in this series and updates in general regarding HNC. So I'd encourage you to reach out to my colleague Amanda Bogan in Development and Alumni Relations at SAIS. I think she's put her contact information in the chat there for you to see as well, or you're certainly welcome to get in touch with me or my colleagues on the faculty as well. So we're hoping to have a lot more interesting discussions on these issues. It's a very important part of China's engagement with the world, and I think we're really uniquely situated to do much more with it. So thank you all very much for coming tonight, and I hope to see you at future events, and hopefully in person at the 35th anniversary main celebrations we're having in June, which will be both in Nanjing, and we expect to have some events in Washington as well. So I hope to see some of you in those settings as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.